It was Saturday evening, and the sun had just set, creating a twilight that made it difficult to decide whether to turn on the headlights. Mark Evans did not have to decide, he was pulling into his garage on a quiet street in Sharpsburg. A moment later, a slender dark on Saturday evening, Mark Evans arrived home after a business meeting in Pittsburgh. The sun had just set, creating a twilight that made it difficult to decide whether to turn on the headlights. Evans did not have to decide, he was pulling into his garage on a quiet street in Sharpsburg. A slender, dark-haired man emerged from a side door, carrying a duffel bag, briefcase and laptop. Years of experience allowed him to handle the items with ease. He entered his house without calling out to his wife, Lisa, knowing she wasn't home. He went to the living room, placing his briefcase and laptop on the couch and his garment bag at the stairs. He hung his coat in a closet by the front door, then removed his jacket and tie. The man, who had been to a regional meeting of managers at ABC Industries, returned home. He was not a manager, but the top systems analyst. His supervisor was good at organizing staff, but clueless about computer systems. He had told his wife he would be back on Monday, claiming the meeting was followed by weekend seminars. He had his reasons for this. He entered his house without calling out to his wife, Lisa, knowing she wasn't home. He went to the living room, placing his briefcase and laptop on the couch and his garment bag at the stairs. He hung his coat in a closet by the front door, then removed his jacket and tie. He undid the top buttons of his shirt. He proceeded to undo the top buttons of his shirt. He had just returned from a regional meeting of managers at ABC Industries, though he wasn't technically a manager, but the top systems analyst. His supervisor was good at organizing staff, but clueless about computer systems. He had told his wife he would be back Monday, claiming the meeting was followed by weekend seminars. He had his reasons for this. He didn't want to return too early. Regretting not bringing comfortable clothes to the trip, he knew Lisa would have questioned why. Now home, he showered and changed into jeans and a polo shirt. After a quick meal of leftovers and a bottle of beer, he read the local newspaper in the living room. Appearing as a husband relaxing after a trip, in reality he was trying to deal with a personal crisis he'd worked through. He had not wanted to return too early, as he knew Lisa would have questioned why he had left so early. He showered and changed into jeans and a polo shirt after a quick meal of leftovers and a bottle of beer. He read the local newspaper in the living room. In reality, he was trying to deal with a personal crisis he had worked through. He was experiencing denial, but still facing anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. Past midnight, he cleaned up the kitchen realizing it was procrastination. Unable to find another solution, he put on a light jacket and headed to the side door, remembering something. He returned to the living room, sent an email from his laptop, then left the house after 5 minutes. In the garage, he drove away. The garage door closed behind him at 7:37 a.m. The emergency operator in Sharpsburg answered a call at 7:37 a.m. "What's your emergency?" the young female voice asked. "I need the police. I think a crime has been committed," the woman replied. "Where are you located, ma'am?" the operator asked. "I am at a pay phone on Park Drive near George Washington Park," she replied. "I understand the poor," the operator said. At 37 a.m. the emergency operator received a call from a young female voice reporting an emergency. The operator inquired as to the location of the call and was informed that the incident occurred near George Washington Park on Park Drive. The operator then asked the woman to clarify the nature of the incident. She stated that she was not the victim of an attack or robbery, but was in the vicinity of the incident. She described seeing a car parked on the access road to the picnic areas with its doors open and lights on, and noted the presence of blood. The emergency operator then asked further questions to ascertain the situation. The emergency operator inquired about the nature of the incident, to which the young woman responded, "No, I wasn't the victim of an attack or robbery. I was simply running through the park on the access road to the picnic areas when I noticed a car parked there. The doors were open, the lights were on, and there was a significant amount of blood. I'm not sure if an ambulance will be required. Are there any injuries?" The operator then asked, "Were there any injuries?" The woman replied, "No, there was nobody there. There was just an empty car and blood. A few seconds later, she added, I didn't look around much. I was scared that someone might come after me, so I ran to this pay phone to call you. You did the right thing. A car is on the way and should be there in less than an hour. Please wait for the officers so you can show them the exact location. Armed, the caller replied, No, I'm not waiting. What if they come after me? I'm going home. She then hung up. The emergency operator stared at the screen as the call ended. Damn it. I hope I didn't divert officers from something more important. At approximately 2:00 p.m. Detective Peter Nesbitt arrived at the Evans residence. As he exited his vehicle, a blonde woman drove up in the driveway. He immediately approached her, saying, Excuse me, I'm looking for Mrs. Evans. She turned and pulled a suitcase from the car, saying, I'm Lisa Evans. Do I know you? He replied, No, ma'am. I'm. At 1500 hours, Detective Peter Nesbitt from the Sharpsburg Police Department arrived at the Evans residence. A blonde woman drove up to the driveway. As he got out of his car, he quickly approached her and said, Excuse me, I'm looking for Mrs. Evans. She turned, pulled a suitcase from the car, and replied, I'm Lisa Evans. Do I know you? I'm Detective Peter Nesbitt from the Sharpsburg Police Department. We're trying to locate your husband, Mark Evans. His car was found abandoned in George Washington Park this morning. He showed her his badge and ID. Lisa looked concerned, but then said, Mark is in Pittsburgh. He always leaves his car at the airport. You must be from the police. I believe this is the correct vehicle, the detective stated, holding up the license plate. The VIN and registration match. Could you confirm if this is your husband's car? I'm not sure, Lisa replied, her voice tinged with concern. He usually leaves his car at the airport. Why is it not there now? We believe it may have been stolen from the airport, the detective continued. When did you last speak to him? When did you last speak to your husband? Could you call him now to make sure he's in Pittsburgh? Does he have a mobile phone? I'll call him now, Lisa said, putting down her bag and rummaging through her purse for her phone. He called me yesterday morning from Pittsburgh. I'll call him now. She dialed his number, but a phone rang in the background. Could you call your husband now to confirm that he is in Pittsburgh? Does he have a mobile phone that you can use to contact him? He has a mobile phone. He called me yesterday morning from Pittsburgh. I'll call him now. She dialed his number, but a phone rang in the detective's pocket. He answered, Hello, Mrs. Evans. I'm surprised to hear from you. How did you get Mark's mobile phone? Nesbitt replied, I'm afraid I can't give it to you. It's evidence in a possible major crime. It was found in your husband's car. Lisa, now more concerned, asked, What do you mean, major crime? Your husband's car it was found in your husband's car, with the doors open and a bullet hole. We need to find him to rule him out as a victim or suspect. Could you call his hotel in Pittsburgh? Of course. The hotel number is in my address book. He always stays at the same Holiday Inn. Come inside and we'll sort this out. Nesbitt replied, I can't give it to you. It's evidence in a possible major crime. It was found in your husband's car. What do you mean? His car was found with the doors open and a bullet hole. We need to find him to rule him out as a victim or suspect. Evans' house. We need to determine if Mr. Evans is a sufferer or a suspect. Please bring it here ASAP. I'll be waiting. He hung up and sat down across from Lisa. A search warrant. You can search all you want, just ask. I want you to find my husband. Detective Nesbitt replied. I need to follow protocol. If your husband is. The detective continued. Lisa entered the kitchen and located the number. She called the hotel and, after hanging up, turned to the detective. Mark's briefcase and laptop are in the living room. I don't understand. The detective looked thoughtful. Hi, Dave. It's Pete. I need a search warrant for Evans' house. We need to determine if Mr. Evans is a victim or a suspect. Bring it here ASAP. I'll be waiting. He hung up and sat down across from Lisa. A search warrant? Lisa asked. You can search all you want, just ask. I want you to find my husband. I need to follow protocol, Detective Nesbitt replied. If your husband is Evans' house. I need to establish whether Mr. Evans is a victim or a suspect. Please bring the relevant documentation to the office as soon as possible. He ended the call and sat down opposite Lisa. You are welcome to conduct a search of the premises. However, you will require a search warrant to do so. If your husband is involved in any illegal activities, any evidence found without a warrant cannot be used in court. Lisa, visibly agitated, replied, illegal? Mark doesn't do anything illegal. He works with computers. Nesbitt inquired, why did he return to town without informing you? Lisa turned pale and whispered, oh no, he can't be involved. Lisa was visibly distressed as she explained that Mark was not involved in any illegal activities. She stated that he was employed in the field of computer science and inquired about the reason for his early return to the town. She expressed her uncertainty about the circumstances surrounding his return, emphasizing that she had no information to suggest that he was involved in any illicit activities. The detective, Nesbitt, urged calm and asked her to consider the possibility that Mark might have been injured. He emphasized that it was crucial to proceed with caution and to gather more information before making any assumptions. Lisa, her voice tinged with concern, replied that she understood the importance of thorough investigation and that all officers were committed to conducting their duties in accordance with protocol. I have no idea why he came home early. All I know is that he's not involved in anything illegal. He could be hurt somewhere. You have to find him, Detective Nesbitt. We don't know anything for sure yet, Mrs. Evans. I need to do things right. All of our officers are looking for your husband. Why don't you make some coffee while we wait for the warrant? His sympathetic tone calmed Lisa, and she began to make coffee. However, she tensed again when he said, while we have coffee, could you tell me how you spent the last 48 hours? We need statements from everyone involved. Nesbitt waited a few minutes before asking for a preliminary statement. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, while he described the condition of Mark's car, including the bullet hole and blood. He said the blood suggested a second bullet shot the body, which was lying on firewood next to the vehicle was towed for further inspection, and the medical examiner and forensic scientist were still working on the scene. Detective David Clean, Nesbitt's partner, arrived with the search warrant and 2 forensic technicians. A thorough search was then initiated. Detective David Clean Nesbitt arrived on the scene with the search warrant and 2 forensic technicians. They began a thorough search of the Evans home garage and car. Nesbitt arranged with Lisa to collect Mark's razor and toothbrush for DNA comparison. Lisa was so distressed that Nesbitt asked her to stay on the couch while they finished the search. After an hour, they decided to take only Mark's briefcase, laptop and DNA samples. Nesbitt and Lisa proceeded to the forensics van, where Nesbitt took the opportunity to ask Mrs. Evans about her husband's laptop password. Lisa, keen to assist, informed Nesbitt that the password had previously been his first and last name, and his birth year, Trimark 19771. However, none of the variations were successful. Nesbitt reassured her that the technicians would find a way to access the laptop. Mrs. Evans, I understand that the laptop in question was password protected. Lisa, I am hopeful that I can assist you in this matter. The password was originally composed of his first and last name, followed by his birth year, Trimark 19771. However, I am afraid that none of the variations have been effective thus far. Nesbitt reassured her that our technicians will find a way around it. The items in question were stored in the forensic van. Nesbitt sat with Lisa to obtain her statement. So, Mrs. Evans, I require some basic information about your whereabouts this weekend. Let's begin with Saturday morning. Lisa took a deep breath. On Saturday morning, I performed domestic tasks. Mark called from Pittsburgh at approximately 1 o'clock or 1:30, apologizing for not being home. I went shopping until 4:30, then came home after dinner around 7:30. I went to a friend's house and stayed the night. This morning, I got up late, took my time, and got home around 2:00. As she explained, she grew more tense, staring at the floor and clenching her fists. Detective Nesbitt finished writing, closed his notebook and said that we might need more details later. Mrs. Evans, this is enough for now, but please be ready to provide more if needed. He pocketed his notepad and pen, then stood up to join the others, searching the garage and car before leaving. He asked, "Do you have any recent full-length photos of your husband? A good headshot would." As she explained, she grew more tense, staring at the floor and clenching her fists. Detective Nesbitt finished writing, closed his notebook and said, "We might need more details later, Mrs. Evans. This is enough for now, but please be ready to provide more if needed." He pocketed his notepad and pen, then stood up to join the others as they searched the garage and car. Before leaving, he asked, "Do you have any recent full-length photos of your husband? A good headshot would also help. We only have his driver's license photo." He walked to the fireplace, glancing at wedding photos. Lisa quickly fetched a photo album. "Here are some recent photos, Detective. Take your pick." They sat together, and Nesbitt chose a group photo and a headshot of Mark. "These will be perfect." Lisa handed him the photos, and he asked, "Is the man in the photo a relative? If we can't use the razor or toothbrush, a family member could help." Lisa replied that this was Blake Moore, Mark's best friend since elementary school. Mark had no nearby relatives. Nesbitt thanked her and joined the others in the garage. Lisa, looking visibly upset, stayed at the kitchen table. Nesbitt felt sympathy for her. Her husband was missing and possibly involved in a serious incident. The fact that she didn't know he was in town added to the mystery. The detectives and forensic experts finished searching the garage. Nesbitt thanked Lisa and joined the others in the garage. Lisa, visibly upset, remained at the kitchen table. Nesbitt felt sympathy for her. Her husband was missing and possibly involved in a serious incident. The fact that she didn't know he was in town added to the mystery. The detectives and forensic experts finished searching the garage and car. They found blood stains on the gas and brake pedals of Lisa's car, prompting them to tow it for further inspection. As the technicians packed up, the detectives discussed the case. Nesbitt, facing the side door, said to his partner, "What's your opinion of Mrs. Evans? I have my doubts, especially with the blood in her car." His partner replied, "She seemed like a worried wife, but it's hard to tell right now." "We shouldn't jump to conclusions," Nesbitt decided. "Let's see her reaction when we tell her about the blood and towing her car." Nesbitt entered the kitchen after knocking, which startled Lisa, who was on her mobile phone. She promptly ended the call. "You're back," Nesbitt said. "I thought you were finished." "We found blood smears on the pedals of your car," Nesbitt continued. "We're towing it for a thorough inspection. I hope you don't mind, Lisa." Nesbitt entered the kitchen suddenly, startling Lisa, who was on her cell phone. "You're back," Nesbitt said. "I thought you were done." "What do you mean?" Lisa asked. "We found blood smears on the pedals of your car," Nesbitt replied. "We're towing it for a thorough inspection. I hope you don't mind." "I looked shocked," Lisa replied. "I didn't see any blood." "We need to know how it got there," Nesbitt replied. "If it's related to the park incident, we'll push for answers. Also, we'll need the shoes you wore today. I haven't been to the park in weeks." "I don't understand how I didn't see any blood," Nesbitt replied. "We need to know how it got there. If it's related to the park incident, we'll push for answers. Also, we'll need the shoes you wore today. I haven't been to the park in weeks. I don't understand how there could be blood in my car." She handed him her shoes and then slumped into a chair, covering her face and sobbing. Both detectives realized they needed more information and said goodbye, leaving Lisa slumped on the kitchen chair. "What do you think, Dave? Is she a worried wife or a good actress? Did you notice she was on the phone and hung up quickly?" David Klein shook his head. "I don't know, Pete. She seems sincere, but if the blood in her car is her husband's, she could be involved. We should talk to their friends and neighbors, maybe." It is possible that someone has information regarding the matter. It is probable that she was discussing the case with her closest associate. It may be beneficial to conduct a thorough investigation. I would like to ascertain why he returned ahead of schedule. This could be a crucial piece of information. Detective Nesbitt collected the shoes as evidence, as they arrived separately. They returned to the station alone, each attempting to interpret the clues. They spent the remainder of their shift reviewing the reports. The following morning, Peter and Dave arrived early, keen to familiarize themselves with the case. They were greeted by the forensics and medical examiner reports. It took an hour to review them. Peter, the reports indicate a consistent narrative, but it is important to avoid haste. We should consult the computer for further evidence and also consult Mark's lawyer, Robert Graham. David concurred, and they visited Mark's lawyer, Robert Graham, who promptly allocated them a few minutes. I am unable to discuss my client's legal situation. What is required, Detective Nesbitt stated, is confirmation of these emails sent to you from Mark Evans' computer. We need to ensure that they are not merely drafts. He handed over 4 pages, which the lawyer confirmed. I can confirm receipt of the originals. The detectives thanked him and headed to their car, exchanging smiles on their way to ABC Industrial. Peter said, as you mentioned, the spouse is usually involved, but we have more work to do at Mark's workplace. They were ushered into his supervisor's office. Detective Klein took the lead in investigating the discovery of Mark Evans's car in George Washington Park. You might have read about it. We have some questions. Mark B. assured them of his cooperation. Mark is a valuable employee. What do you need? Mark is expected to remain in Pittsburgh until Friday evening. He is scheduled to attend seminars on Saturday and Sunday, but his schedule must be confirmed. Mark's superior has confirmed that no events are scheduled for the weekend. I expect him to return on Friday evening. Detective Klein noted this information and inquired if there had been any unusual behavior or concerns recently. The superior thought for a moment before responding that Mark had appeared preoccupied recently. I inquired if he was experiencing any difficulties, but he said he was fine. He was in a state of deep contemplation. I had presumed that he was simply exerting himself to the fullest. The detectives expressed gratitude and returned to their vehicle. By late morning, they had resumed work at the office and received preliminary DNA results and a forensic report. This included a peculiar box with wires, which appeared to contain additional pieces of the puzzle. They reviewed their notes and information in an interrogation room, feeling more confident that they had a more comprehensive understanding. They decided to visit Lisa Evans again, arriving at the Evans house around 3 p.m. Mr. Last name, they did not call in advance to take her by surprise. Lisa appeared taken aback when the detectives arrived. Have you found my husband? She asked. I contact the sergeant every 2 hours, and he has no information to report, Detective Nesbitt replied. No, but we have made some progress. We would like to ask you a few questions. Lisa, looking embarrassed, said, please come in. I will do my best to help. In the living room, the detective sat opposite her. Detective Klein opened his notebook and asked, is there anything you want to tell us about? The relationship between Lisa and Blake Moore has become strained. Blake is my husband's closest friend. He is merely a friend of mine. Detective Nesbitt inquired calmly, are you currently involved in a romantic relationship with Blake Moore? Lisa, visibly flustered, replied, absolutely not. How could you even ask me such a question? The detective stood up and stated, we require your presence at the station for a formal statement. Lisa panicked. Am I under arrest? She asked. Why am I required to go to the station? You are not under arrest yet. We need an official statement from you. I don't require legal representation, Lisa replied promptly. I will attend the station voluntarily and assist in any way I can in the search for Mark. Lisa accompanied the detectives to their vehicle. At the station, they escorted her to a small interrogation room designed to create a negative atmosphere. We will ask you to wait here while we gather our documents, the detective said. Do you require legal representation? Lisa declined, shaking her head and her blue eyes brimming with tears. The detective left. The room was set up to ensure the cameras were operational. Detective Klein informed his commanding officer that he wanted a comprehensive recording of all conversations, as he believed they were on the verge of solving the case. Peter Nesbitt arrived with files and suggested that they take a moment to reflect. The three men agreed and spent 20 minutes in the coffee shop discussing the case and planning the interrogation. Meanwhile, across town, a volunteer at Crime Stoppers answered a call. "Good morning," they said. "This is Crime Stoppers. We pay up to $1,000,000 for information on solved crimes. This call is being recorded." After a few seconds of silence, an older man spoke. He asked, "Can I get money if I help the police, and depends on your tip and how it helps the police. Do you have any information about a crime?" There was another pause before the caller said, "Do I get the money right away, and what if the police trick me?" "The money isn't from the police, so they won't scam you. Tell me what you know and I'll give you a code number you can call back in. A few days will be required to ascertain whether your contribution has assisted the individual." The man sounded frustrated. "I require the funds immediately. If you require sustenance, I can provide you with information regarding food shelters." The volunteer smiled, but stated that if your contribution is successful, you could purchase a significant quantity of juice. "I will wait. I observed an individual dispose of a weapon into the river beneath the 3rd Street Bridge on Sunday morning. He had a rifle and 2 shovels." The volunteer inquired as to whether this occurred on the east side of the bridge. "Did it?" "He disposed of the items in the water. He had thrown them off the dock. I can describe him. He was large, with blonde hair, and his car was a dark blue. The license plate began with an SS, but I forget the rest." The volunteer took down the information and said, "I have everything we need. Your number is 127. Call back in a few days and we'll let you know if it helps." The volunteer relayed the information to the police liaison officer, and a diver was sent out within an hour. The items were located swiftly, and the weapon was transported to the crime laboratory, where it was matched to a recent crime scene in George Washington Park. A report was dispatched to the detectives, and a technician retrieved the 2 shovels from the property clerk. As the detectives exited the coffee shop, they were met by a clerk delivering the ballistics and Crime Stoppers reports. "Detectives, we have the weapon used in the George Washington Park shooting. The attached report may assist you in identifying the perpetrator." The items were located swiftly. The weapon was taken to the crime lab, where it matched a recent crime scene in George Washington Park. A report was sent to the detectives, and a technician retrieved the 2 shovels from the property clerk. As the detectives left the coffee shop, they were met by a clerk delivering the ballistics and Crime Stoppers reports. "Detectives, we have the weapon used in the George Washington Park shooting. The attached report might lead you to the perpetrator." The clerk handed over the reports. Klein and Nesbitt reviewed the reports, then called up vehicle records on a computer. "Pete, let's split up. I'll question our guest in the interrogation room, and you can get a uniformed officer to bring in Mr. Moore for questioning." "Sounds like a plan, Dave. Things are coming together nicely." Detective Klein gathered the reports and headed to the interrogation room, where Lisa Evans was waiting. Meanwhile, his partner arranged for a uniformed officer. Klein and Nesbitt reviewed the reports and then consulted vehicle records on a computer. "Pete, I propose we divide our duties. I will question our guest in the interrogation room, and you can arrange for a uniformed officer to bring in Mr. Moore." "Dave, this plan sounds effective." Detective Klein gathered the reports and headed to the interrogation room, where Lisa Evans was waiting. Meanwhile, his partner arranged for a uniformed officer to visit Blake Moore's house. Soon they were on their way to the interview room. Lisa sat calmly, showing no fear or sadness. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Mrs. Evans. This room is monitored and recorded," Detective Klein said. "I don't mind. I have nothing to hide," she replied. "Good. Let's get started. Are you having an affair with Blake Moore? Yes or no?" Lisa's shoulders slumped and she looked away. "Yes," she whispered. "We have papers from Mark's laptop showing that you have," Klein replied. The detectives entered the interview room and Lisa was seated calmly, displaying no visible fear or sadness. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Mrs. Evans," Detective Clean said. "This room is monitored and recorded," she replied. "I don't mind. I have nothing to hide. Let's get started. Are you having an affair with Blake Moore?" Lisa's shoulders slumped and she looked away. "Yes," she whispered. "We have proof of your affair. Your husband knew. He sent these to his attorney, planning a divorce on grounds of infidelity. This map shows your visits to Moore's house." Lisa looked shocked. "How did Mark know?" Clean held up a small device he installed in your car, monitoring your location in real time. "He knew for weeks and he wanted a divorce." She began to cry. Klein continued. "Mark documented your interactions with Moore. The last map was from Saturday. Evidence of your relationship. Your husband was aware of your visits to Mr. Moore's residence." Lisa looked visibly shocked. "How did Mr. Moore know?" Clean held up a small device he had installed in your car, monitoring your location in real time. She stared at the device. "Mr. Moore had been aware of your relationship for some time and wanted a divorce." She began to cry. Klein continued. "Mr. Moore had documented your interactions with each other. The last map was from Saturday night, when Mr. Moore went missing. He emailed his lawyer saying he was going to confront you and feared he might get arrested," Lisa said, "but Mr. Moore never showed up at Blake's. I spent the night there." Klein replied, "Preliminary DNA results show the blood in the park is his. We found the weapon used, linked to your lover. The question is how long you'll cover it up." Lisa insisted, "Blake didn't do anything to Mr. Moore. We were together all night." Clean added. "On the night in question, he emailed his lawyer to say that he was going to confront you and feared he might get arrested. Lisa said that Mark never showed up at Blake's. I spent the night there." Klein replied, "Preliminary DNA results show the blood in the park is his. We found the weapon used linked to your lover. The question is how long you'll cover it up." Lisa insisted that Blake didn't do anything to Mark. "We were together all night," Clean added. "We also found your husband's blood in your car and on your shoes. My partner is picking up Mr. Moore now. Whoever tells us what happened and where to find Mark's body, will get a better deal." Lisa was silent, visibly shaken, as Klein gathered the papers and waited for her response. Detective Klein handed Lisa the blood test reports, but she barely glanced at them. "Mark can't be dead. I love him. I need him," she sobbed, clearly very upset. "Blake, we also found your husband's blood in your car and on your shoes. My partner is now collecting Mr. Moore. If you can tell us what happened and where to find Mark's body, we can offer you a better deal." Lisa was silent, visibly upset, as Klein gathered the papers and waited. "I love him. I need him," she sobbed, clearly very upset. "Blake, if Mark got hurt in the park, we had nothing to do with it." She cried into a crumpled, wet handkerchief. Detective Klein gave her a few minutes to regain her composure. When she seemed calmer, he said, "There is no doubt that your husband is dead. The medical examiner concluded that there is over a 95% chance, based on blood loss and the lack of treatment at any facility in the county." He handed her the report and photos of the scene. "I'll let you know if Mark got hurt in the park. We have no involvement in this matter." She sobbed into a crumpled handkerchief. Detective Klein gave her a few minutes to compose herself. When she seemed calmer, he stated, "There is no doubt your husband is dead. The medical examiner concluded there's over a 95% chance, based on blood loss and the lack of treatment at any facility in the county. I'll leave you alone for a few minutes to think. You're not helping yourself by denying responsibility." Klein left the room, placed the reports on his desk, and shook his head as he passed his commanding officer. He headed to the break room for coffee while his commander monitored Lisa on the interrogation room camera. Detective Nesbitt thought about the case and drove to Blake Moore's house. The graphic images caused her to become visibly distraught. "I'll give you a few minutes to think. You're not helping yourself by denying responsibility." Clean exited the room, placed the reports on his desk, and shook his head as he passed his commanding officer. He headed to the break room for coffee while his commander monitored Lisa on the interrogation room camera. Detective Nesbitt thought about the case and drove to Blake Moore's house. A patrol car was parked there. Nesbitt was almost surprised when Blake Moore answered the door promptly. "Yes, officers, how can I help you?" Moore asked. "I'm Detective Nesbitt. I'm here about Mark Evans' disappearance. We need you at the station for questioning. Mrs. Evans is there now, and we have questions that require your input." "Am I under arrest?" Moore asked. "I know Mark is missing, but I don't know how." A patrol car was parked at the scene. Nesbitt was taken aback when Blake Moore answered the door promptly. "Officers, how may I help you?" Moore asked, seeing the police detective. "I'm Detective Nesbitt. I'm here about Mark Evans' disappearance. We need you at the station for questioning. Mrs. Evans is there now, and we have questions that require your input." "Am I under arrest?" Moore asked. "I know Mark is missing, but I don't know how I can help. We have questions you might be able to answer. Please come with us." "You're not under arrest." Moore, too stunned to resist, joined them in the unmarked car. In the back, he complied with department protocol. Detective Nesbitt turned to his partner. "Let's head to the station on the way." Nesbitt asked. "More specifically, how well do you know Mrs. Evans?" "She's just Mark's wife to me." "Why do you ask?" Moore replied. "Just wondering what you do, Mr. Moore." "I run a." "Do you have any questions for us?" "We have questions about the incident." "You're not under arrest." Moore, too stunned to resist, joined them in the unmarked car. He sat in the back, complying with department protocol. Detective Nesbitt turned to his partner. "Let's head to the station on the way." "How well do you know Mrs. Evans?" "She's just Mark's wife to me." "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering what do you do, Mr. Moore?" "I run a landscaping company." "Moore's Landscaping." "We do a lot of commercial work, even for the city." Moore said, relaxing a bit at the station. He was placed in an interrogation room next to Lisa's. Detective Nesbitt gathered Klein's folders and began questioning Moore. Initially, Moore denied the affair, but evidence from emails and surveillance reports made him confess. He admitted the affair lasted almost 4 months, but insisted neither of them had been injured. Moore stated that he does a significant amount of commercial landscaping work, including for the city. While relaxing at the station, Moore was taken to an interrogation room next to Lisa's detective, Nesbitt. Nesbitt collected Klein's folders and began questioning Moore. Initially, Moore denied the affair, but evidence from emails and surveillance reports prompted him to confess. He admitted to having an affair that lasted almost 4 months, but insisted that neither of them had harmed Mark and that they had not left his house the night he disappeared. As Nesbitt pressed him, Moore suggested a new theory. If Mark had found out about their affair, he might have become enraged or even hired someone to make it look like they were involved. Nesbitt countered that they had the weapon used. A witness described Moore in his car and provided most of his license plate number. She asked him not to claim that Mark had framed him with an elaborate self. Nesbitt pressed on, "Mark didn't leave the house that night. We didn't go with him." Moore countered, "What if Mark found out about us? He might have gone into a rage, or even hired someone to make it look like we were involved." Nesbitt retorted, "We have the weapon used. A witness described you in your car, and you provided most of your license plate number." Moore became agitated and said, "Don't try to claim Mark framed you with an elaborate self-destruction." Blake Moore became agitated and said, "You don't know Mark. We've been best friends since elementary school, but I've learned not to mess with his girlfriends or his wife. In high school, I dated one of his girlfriends behind his back when he found out. He scared me, even though I'm bigger and stronger. He warned me he'd liquidate me if I did it again." The detective, slightly amused, replied, "So you were scared of him, but still had an affair with his wife?" Blake, calming down, said, "I couldn't resist her. It built up over time. A few years ago, I made a decision that would change my life. Since then, I have been seeing someone, but I was surprised when I found out that he had discovered our relationship. I am sure that you and Lisa planned this. You can either come clean or face the maximum penalty, but you must decide. Blake insisted that we had nothing to do with it. If Mark found out, he might have done something drastic. Perhaps he set us up. Detective Nesbitt said that we have enough evidence to search your home, car and office. If you confess now, you may receive a lenient sentence. Use your head, Blake. Blake expressed outrage at the suggestion that he had harmed Mark, suggesting that Lisa may have been responsible, although he was uncertain. The detective collected his papers and exited the room, remarking that when criminals collaborate, one party often attempts to blame the other. You are not expected to be leaving anytime soon. Meanwhile, Detective Nesbitt discovered another report from his partner. The shovels recovered from the river are from Moore's Landscaping. These individuals appear to believe that we will not discover the truth. The detectives presented their evidence to the district attorney, despite the absence of a body. The evidence was compelling enough. Evidence was presented to press charges half an hour later. Lisa Evans and Blake Moore were charged with Mark Evans' homicide. They proclaimed their innocence as their Miranda rights were read. After the arraignment, Lisa and Blake were fingerprinted and photographed. They were not instructed to smile as they were led back to their cells. Speaking for the first time since being charged, Blake asked, "What are we going to do? They can't believe we did anything to Mark, can they?" Lisa asked, still sniffling. "Do we need our own lawyers, or maybe share one?" In an effort to reduce expenditure, given that we have all been accused of the same thing, I believe that Mark has misled us. Blake stated that he was speaking from a place of frustration. He asked, "Is it possible for you to believe that? Why would Mark go to such extremes?" Lisa inquired, her tone expressing shock. "I don't think you knew Mark as well as you thought." "I'm amazed he didn't take action when he found out about us. If I thought he'd find out, I wouldn't have involved you," Blake replied, shaking his head. He proceeded to share a past incident in which he had discreetly dated Mark's girlfriend while she was detained by the cell bars. The two individuals were separated by a concrete wall, which made communication straightforward. I find it difficult to believe that Mark would engage in such behavior. I am unaware of the method by which he became aware of our relationship. We always exercised caution and only met in his absence. Lisa stated in a thoughtful manner, "I regret betraying him, even if he is not deceased. I wish for a divorce." Her voice faltered, and she began to sob. Blake listened to her, and said, "Lisa, please stop. You were aware of the risks when you came to my residence. You were cognizant of the potential consequences." She became silent and replied, "You are correct. I only hope you will forgive me." Lisa suggested I contact Robert Graham, our attorney, to discuss representation for both of us on a cost-sharing basis. Robert Graham agreed, but ultimately decided not to proceed, citing his involvement in Mark's divorce proceedings. He recommended Basil Smith as a suitable alternative. Lisa concurred, and Basil Smith was contacted. Blake expressed his satisfaction and thanked Lisa. They then waited in their cells until Basil Smith, a seasoned lawyer, arrived. The introductions were brief, and Smith proceeded to review the matter. Lisa suggested I could call Robert Graham, our attorney, to represent both of us and split the costs. They agreed, and Lisa requested that an officer make a call. However, Robert Graham declined due to his involvement in Mark's divorce proceedings, recommending his colleague, Basil Smith. Lisa agreed, and Smith was on his way. Blake was pleased to hear this and thanked Lisa. They waited in their cells until Basil Smith, a seasoned lawyer, arrived. The introductions were brief, and Smith reviewed the charges. "You're both charged with Mark Evans' homicide. What did the officers tell you?" Smith asked Mrs. Evans. "You first, just the main points." Lisa recounted her story, ending in tears. "I had nothing to do with it. I love Mark. I couldn't hurt him." Smith then turned to Blake. "Your turn, briefly." Blake summarized his experience, asserting we had nothing to do with Mark's disappearance. "I think Mark organized this to frame us." Smith, sensing the urgency, said we need to focus on getting you both out of here. Bail will likely be set at $100. Will that be a problem for you? Lisa asked, her tone professional and formal. "Do I need $100,000 for bail?" "No, just 10% or $10,000, Smith replied. Do I need $100,000 for bail? Lisa asked, her voice expressing concern. No, just $10,000 cash for the bail bond, Smith reassured her. They agreed that they could manage bail and were eager to be released. Smith informed them that they would be arraigned the following morning, after which bail would be set. They would then have to make arrangements to leave and prepare to spend the night in custody. Both clients reacted badly to the lawyer's statement. He explained that he could not do more until charges were filed, and that once they were out, he would discuss the case with the district attorney to unseal the evidence and better understand their situation. The two individuals were returned to their cells, where they experienced difficulty sleeping due to the conditions and noise from other prisoners. The following morning at 10:00, they met with their attorney before court. Despite their disheveled appearance, they entered their pleas of not guilty and bail was set at $100,000. Blake, who owned a home in business, quickly negotiated a $10,000 bond and was released by early afternoon. Lisa was less fortunate, as she did not own her home outright and her savings account was empty. She had to call her parents for help. After much persuasion, they agreed to provide the $10,000. However, due to the delay, Lisa was obliged to spend another night in jail, this time with two tipsy courtiers. Once the financial matters had been resolved, she was released, went home, showered, and ignored incoming calls. The next month passed quickly. Lisa learned that Mark had withdrawn the money from their account to protect his share before their divorce. She received the divorce papers without knowing what he did with the cash. Lisa and Blake met with Basil Smith several times. Smith received copies of the evidence and planned to meet with the district attorney to get the charges dropped. The judge dismissed the case, citing the difficulty of achieving a conviction without a body or witness. He suggested hiring a private investigator to determine whether Mark had orchestrated his own disappearance. Blake agreed, but Lisa believed Mark was a victim of a botched carjacking. Over the next few weeks, the investigator found no evidence he attempted to locate the tipster who had reported the incident. The investigator found no evidence of a discarded rifle or shovels, and no one recognized the voice from the call. The tipster never followed up, adding to the mystery. Meanwhile, tensions between Lisa and Blake escalated after his release. Blake suggested they continue their affair, but Lisa refused, blaming him for her situation. I want nothing to do with you except our court case, she said, often crying. Blake's response was cold and dismissive. Lisa, you're not the only woman in town. They only spoke in the presence of their lawyer, maintaining a professional distance. Otherwise, their relationship had become distant. A month after their release, Basil Smith arranged a meeting with District Attorney Jeff Bagden. Lisa and Blake hoped that the charges would be dropped, as they had been molested. Blake and Lisa were taken aback by the questions surrounding their relationship, and so they screened their calls using caller ID and answering machines. They were eager to clear their names and move on. Jeff Bagden, the district attorney, began by saying, I just received the final reports from the medical examiner and police. Based on the evidence, I'm offering a reduced sentence of 8 to 12 years for a guilty plea to second degree. In light of the recent developments, Lisa and Blake were taken aback, asserting their innocence with a resounding clarity. Their legal counsel sought to pacify them, inquiring about the motivations behind Bagden's proposal. Bagden elaborated, stating that new evidence had come to light, including DNA from blood on the license plate and trunk gasket of the car in question, which matched that of Mark Evans. Additionally, black polyethylene found under Mark's car corresponded to material used in their landscaping. Lisa and Blake were visibly agitated, asserting their innocence. Their attorney, attempting to pacify them, inquired about Bagden's motivations for the offer. Bagden stated that new evidence had surfaced. DNA from blood on the car's license plate and trunk gasket matched that of Mark Evans, and black polyethylene found under Mark's car matched material from Lisa's landscaping. Lisa angrily accused Blake, demanding to know what he had done. Blake denied any involvement, stating, You know I had nothing to do with it. You were with me when it happened. Basil Smith intervened, attempting to calm both parties. He addressed Bagden, saying, Excuse my clients. We had hoped the charges would be dropped, and your statement caught them off guard. Bagden, amused, replied, "I understand, but we have enough evidence to." Lisa angrily accused Blake, "What have you done?" Blake exploded, "You know I had nothing to do with it. You were with me when it happened." Basil Smith intervened, calming both of them. He addressed Bagden, "Excuse my clients. We hoped the charges would be dropped, and your statement caught them off guard." Bagden, amused, replied, "I understand, but we have enough evidence to go to trial. The medical examiner report confirms the victim lost too much blood to survive. The crime scene suggests the body was dragged and loaded into a car. The prosecution is confident that Bagden handed over the reports and left." Lisa and Blake hurriedly talked to Smith, who told them to be quiet. He said, "I know you're shocked. Don't fight each other. We need to work together to get through this. The medical examiner's report indicates that the victim lost a significant amount of blood, which makes it unlikely that they survived the incident. The scene of the crime suggests that the body was dragged and placed into a vehicle. The prosecution is confident that Bagden provided the reports and that Lisa and Blake spoke with Smith, who instructed them to remain silent. He stated, "I understand your shock, please refrain from conflict. We need to determine a defense strategy. Do you wish to reject the plea deal?" Both individuals declined the offer, believing it would not result in a conviction. Smith agreed to prepare for trial after their departure. Upon reviewing the reports, Smith began to question the honesty of his clients. Despite his reservations, he was committed to defending them. Several months later, the trial began. Judge Robert Cox took his seat at 10 a.m. In order to establish a defense, it is necessary to reject the plea deal. Both defendants refused the offer, convinced that they would not be convicted. Smith agreed to prepare for trial after they left, but he was unable to find any evidence that would support his client's claims of innocence. Despite his doubts, he was committed to defending them. Months later, the trial began. Judge Robert Cox took his seat at 10:00 a.m. On Monday, Basil Smith sat between Lisa and Blake to manage their tension. He had considered suggesting separate lawyers, but they couldn't afford it. Blake's business was struggling and Lisa had quit her job due to the stress of the trial and difficulties with her missing husband's friends. District Attorney Jeff Bagden began his opening statement directly. "Members of the jury, we do not have Mark Evans' body, but we intend to prove that he is dead and that the defendants are guilty of his homicide." He revealed that the defendants had an affair which Mark Evans discovered, leading him to file for divorce, although it is unclear how or when Mark found out. However, traces on his computer showed that he knew when and where they met. Emails documented his tracking efforts, financial preparations for divorce and his intention to confront them. While we cannot pinpoint the exact time of their meeting, we know the results. Evidence suggests that they met at Mr. Moore's residence, where Mr. Evans was incapacitated, placed in the passenger seat and driven to George Washington Park. There, he was shot in the upper chest while likely unconscious. He was dragged from the car, thrown to the ground and shot again, this time striking his coronary artery. Graphic photos will show, at this point, Lisa Evans lost her composure, and Judge Cox was required to restore order. Bagden continued after the second shot. Mr. Evans was wrapped in plastic and dragged from the site, then loaded into Mr. Moore's trunk. He was driven to an unknown location and buried. Evans lost her composure, and Judge Cox was forced to restore order. After the second shot, Bagden continued. Mr. Evans was wrapped in plastic and dragged from the scene to Mr. Moore's trunk. He was driven to an unknown location and buried. The weapon and shovels were dumped in the river, but a concerned citizen reported this, leading police to recover them. Forensic analysis confirmed the defendant's presence at the crime scene. Mr. Evans' blood was found on Mr. Moore's car and on Lisa Evans' shoes. Bagden concluded that the defense would claim they were not at the scene, relying on each other's alibi. "I am confident you will see through this and find them guilty." Basil Smith countered, emphasizing the presumption of innocence and urging the jury to focus on the evidence. Despite his efforts, the district attorney's statement had a strong impact. The first witness, a computer expert, gave evidence about the emails and maps Mark Evans used to track his wife's meetings with Mr. Moore. The tracking device described in Mark's letter to his counsel accurately logged locations and times. This evidence embarrassed Lisa Evans while Blake Moore appeared bored. Smith's cross-examination. Smith's cross-examination yielded little as the device and emails were indisputable. Reporters took note, especially about the tracking device, anticipating interest from their readers. After an extended lunch break, the trial resumed with testimony from the emergency operator and 2 patrolmen who first responded. They provided basic information about the drama. The court was presented with key facts about the discovery of Mark Evans's car. The intensity of the trial escalated when detectives and medical examiners described the crime scene, supported by large graphic photographs showing bullet holes, blood and drag marks. The medical examiner detailed the blood loss, estimating 3 to 4 pints, and described blood jets indicating. The intensity of the trial increased when detectives and medical examiners described the crime scene, supported by large graphic photographs showing bullet holes, blood and drag marks. The medical examiner detailed the blood loss, estimating 3 to 4 pints, and described blood jets indicating a severed artery. He concluded that Mark Evans was dying when Lisa Evans lost control and screamed, "No, Mark can't be dead." Her outburst forced the judge to adjourn the trial until the next morning. That second day began with the medical expert continuing his testimony, focusing on blood sample tests. After 15 minutes, DA Jeff Bagden ended the second day of the trial. Began with the continuation of the medical expert's testimony, focusing on blood sample tests. After 15 minutes, Mr. Bagden concluded his questioning, turning the witness over to defense attorney Basil Smith. Mr. Smith checked that Lisa Evans, now sedated, was calm. He aimed to refute the graphic execution-like impression of the shooting. Mr. Smith asked, "Estimated Mark Evans lost 3 to 4 pints of blood, but isn't it possible it was 1 to 2 pints, depending on the blood type?" The defense attorney, Basil Smith, questioned the witness on the matter. Smith asked if Evans had been sedated, and if so, if he was calm. He wanted to refute the graphic depiction of the shooting. Smith asked if Evans had lost 3 to 4 pints of blood, but the medical examiner replied that it was unlikely, but not impossible. Smith continued by asking if first aid could have lessened the fatality of Evans' injury. The examiner replied that it was unlikely, but not impossible, and that immediate medical attention would have been acquired. Smith highlighted the lack of evidence for immediate assistance and dismissed the question. The medical examiner replied that, although improbable, the provision of first aid could have reduced the fatality of Mark Evans' injury. The examiner stated that while this was unlikely, it was not impossible that immediate medical attention would have been obtained. Smith highlighted the lack of evidence for immediate assistance and dismissed the witness's claims. Following this, a forensic scientist specializing in weapons and ammunition provided testimony about 2 recovered bullets. One bullet from the car seat was deformed, while the other, from firewood, was in good condition and matched the recovered weapon. Smith inquired as to whether the bullets had been checked for bone or flesh remnants. The technician confirmed minimal traces of blood on the bullets, explaining that passing through layers of padding and fabric likely cleaned them. He noted that the bullets had a full metal jacket, typical for military use, with a gilding metal copper steel jacket around the core. He explained that this jacket is stronger than a standard all-metal one. The technician confirmed the presence of minimal blood traces on the bullets, explaining that their passage through layers of padding and fabric likely resulted in their cleaning. He noted that the bullets had a full metal jacket, typical for military use, with a gilding metal copper steel jacket around the core. He explained that this jacket is stronger than a standard all-metal jacket. While there was no evidence that the bullets had passed through the body, the circumstances and type of bullet explained the situation. The hope of tracing the weapon was futile. It had been sold at a weapons show 20 years ago, with no buyer record. However, Basil Smith did confirm no fingerprints or DNA from the defendants were found on the weapon or casings, and nothing not washed away by river water was wiped clean before disposal. Another technician discussed the shovels found there. No fingerprints or DNA were found, but they were branded Moore's Landscaping. 14 identical shovels were found at Moore's business. Examination yielded no new information. Witnesses from the Forensic Science Department and police continued all morning and afternoon. Basil Smith's most significant cross: no fingerprints or DNA from the defendants were found on the weapon or casings. Anything not washed away by river water was wiped clean before disposal. Another technician discussed the shovels found there. There were no fingerprints or DNA, but they were branded Moore's Landscaping. 14 identical shovels were found at Moore's business. Cross-examination yielded no new information. Witnesses from the Forensic Science Department and police continued all morning and afternoon. Basil Smith's most significant cross-examination occurred with a technician who found blood in Blake Moore's car. The technician admitted the blood could have been planted by a third party, giving Smith a small victory. Things complicated with testimony from the technician at Lisa Evans's home. Blood was found in her car and on her right shoe, although the technician admitted they couldn't determine if the blood was transferred from the shoe to the gas pedal or vice versa. The lawyer hoped this doubt would help Lisa. As the prosecution's witnesses concluded, the third morning began with the defense's evidence presentation. Local newspapers speculated that the defense team anticipated a challenge in countering the prosecution's evidence, particularly in the absence of a body, which they suggested would make a conviction difficult. This was further compounded by the defense's strategy of casting doubt on the assertion that Mark Evans was deceased. The first defense witness, Dr. Wilbur, a blood analysis expert, provided testimony that a more meticulous approach could have been taken in collecting and analyzing blood evidence. Specifically, he noted that a more accurate estimate of blood loss could have been obtained by analyzing blood-soaked soil. He hypothesized that as little as 1 and 2 pints of blood could have been sufficient to create the scene, and that a person losing that amount of blood could have survived. The district attorney did not cross-examine Dr. Wilbur. The next witness is Mr. Moore, who has stated that he is innocent and suggested that Mr. Evans may have been responsible for his own death. He stated that he never owned a weapon and that the shovels found at the scene could have been stolen from his work sites. Mr. Smith will be cross-examined. Blake Moore was asked to provide a reason why Mark Evans would have organized his own homicide. He recounted how Mark had threatened him in high school after he had dated Mark's girlfriend without Mark's knowledge. He was then asked whether this was not the first time he had interfered in Mark Evans's relationships. He was asked whether he thought Mark would have been able to destroy someone if he had wanted to. He would have chosen you, Blake Moore, if he wanted to destroy someone. He muttered that his physical advantage over Mark would have prevented a confrontation, so you think you could intimidate your friend into taking his own life? Is that why you felt comfortable taking his wife? The prosecutor asked, and continued without waiting for an answer. Your actions indicate a narcissistic personality, where you believe you can have any woman and disregard friendship. Basil Smith objected, arguing that the prosecutor was testifying rather than asking questions. The judge agreed and instructed the jury to disregard the prosecutor's last statement. Despite this, Blake was visibly upset but left the stand without further comment. Basil Smith realized that the testimony provided by Blake Moore had the potential to have negative consequences, but hoped that Lisa's testimony might offer a more positive outcome. Lisa, maintaining her composure, emphatically stated that she had not been involved in any attack on her husband and suggested that he might have been carjacked. Basil chose not to ask additional questions. The prosecutor then asked Lisa where she had been between midnight on Saturday and 2 p.m. on Sunday. The prosecutor inquired as to Lisa's whereabouts between midnight on Saturday and 2 p.m. on Sunday. She responded that she had been in the company of Blake Moore at his residence from 8 p.m. on Saturday until approximately 1:30 p.m. on Sunday. On Sunday, you did not respond to the question. Please describe your actions from midnight on Saturday to Sunday. Lisa, visibly flustered, stated that she was in Blake's bedroom at midnight. They were, as you know, engaging in intimate activities. How long did this last? The prosecutor pressed, probably until after 1:00 a.m. Lisa admitted, visibly embarrassed, that they had slept until around 5:45 a.m. She inquired, was Mr. Moore in bed when you woke up? He was there. They engaged in intimate activities again and went back to sleep around 6:30, then got up at 11:00 a.m. Lisa stated in a swift manner, prompting you to rouse him at 6:30. The prosecutor clarified. Lisa, visibly taken aback, replied that he was already prepared. Seeing the jury's reaction, the prosecutor continued, "Please describe the manner in which you roused him." Lisa, visibly distraught, stated, "I simply began performing the act with him." The prosecutor, anticipating a decisive statement, inquired, "Do you truly love your husband?" The prosecutor continued, "You spent the night with his best friend while he took his own life. How can we believe you weren't involved in his end-of-life decisions?" Lisa, crying quietly, was unable to answer. Judge Cox then announced that there were no further questions. A lunch recess was called after Lisa composed herself, and she joined her attorney, Basil Smith, for a somber lunch. The experienced attorney warned them that the case could go either way, privately expressing pessimism since both clients had faltered on the witness stand. The afternoon session ended quickly as Smith announced there were no more defense witnesses. Both attorneys prepared their closing statements. The prosecutor emphasized the overwhelming evidence against the defendants, while the defense stressed the circumstantial nature of the case, the absence of a body and the lack of a clear motive. The jury delivered their verdict at 4:00 p.m. The jury retired for the night after 2 hours of deliberations the previous evening. Lisa and Blake waited at Basil Smith's office for the jury's verdict. Sharing a conference room, they put aside their differences in the hope of being able to leave by 3:30 p.m. The jury returned a verdict, and Lisa's parents, who had traveled to town for the trial, were present at the courthouse when the verdict was announced. The jury found Lisa guilty of second-degree murder. The jury returned a verdict of guilty of second-degree homicide after a 2-hour deliberation. Lisa and Blake were handcuffed and taken into custody, with Lisa having a brief moment to speak to her parents, proclaiming her innocence. The week between conviction and sentencing passed slowly. Lisa's parents visited daily, while Blake received one visit from a cousin at sentencing. Both received a 15-year to life sentence. Basil Smith promised to review the court's decision. Lisa burst into tears and Blake pounded his fist in frustration. They were handcuffed and taken into custody, with Lisa having a brief moment to speak to her parents, proclaiming her innocence. The week between conviction and sentencing passed slowly. Lisa's parents visited daily, while Blake received one visit from a cousin. At sentencing, both received a 15-year to life sentence. Basil Smith promised to review the court records for a possible appeal within 3 days. They were transferred to state prison. Lisa's prison had a good reputation, but Blake had a history of riots. The trial over media coverage ceased, and Lisa Evans and Blake Moore faded from public attention. A couple of months later, Basil Smith and Jeff Bagden met for a drink, reflecting on the case. Smith expressed surprise at the convictions, believing the defendants' stories to be consistent. Lisa Evans and Blake Moore were convicted of Mark Evans' homicide. Basil Smith, a lawyer, was surprised at the convictions and asked Jeff Bagden, a reporter, if he thought the defendants were innocent. Bagden said that the jury didn't believe them. Smith said that he tries not to take cases personally, unless they involve particularly heinous crimes or children. He continued that this case wasn't the worst, but it didn't generate much sympathy for the defendants. A year later, a news item reported a major disturbance at Blake Moore's prison. Moore had been stabbed during the riot and was transferred to the hospital with a collapsed lung. Bagden replied that the jury didn't believe them. "I try not to take these cases personally, unless they involve particularly heinous crimes or children. This case wasn't the worst, but it didn't generate much sympathy for the defendants." A year later, a news item reported a major disturbance at Blake Moore's prison. Blake had been stabbed during the riot and transferred to the hospital with a collapsed lung. He was in serious condition, but expected to survive. 18 months after Lisa Evans and Blake Moore were convicted of Mark Evans' homicide, Basil Smith rarely thought about the case. He had spent the first year reviewing transcripts, but found no legal grounds for appeal. One quiet Wednesday morning at the New York office of the Innocence Project, the receptionist received a FedEx package. Inside were a DVD, a sealed biohazard bag and a multi, in a state of serious condition but with a prognosis of 18 months, Lisa Evans and Blake Moore were convicted of Mark Evans' homicide. Basil Smith rarely reflected on the case. He had spent the first year reviewing transcripts, but found no legal grounds for appeal. One quiet Wednesday morning at the New York office of the Innocence Project, the receptionist received a FedEx package. Inside were a DVD, a sealed biohazard bag and a multi-page letter. Intrigued, she called Tony Kelly, a young lawyer, to look at it. Tony, dressed casually, took the package to his office. He had been with the Innocence Project for a year, doing legal research. He enjoyed helping those wrongfully convicted. Sitting at his desk, he read the letter. The letter addressed to the Innocence Project began by regarding the convictions of Lisa Evans and Blake Moore. "I don't know where to begin, so I'll start at the beginning. My name." She was intrigued, so she asked Tony Kelly, a young lawyer, to look into it. Tony, who was dressed casually, took the package to his office. He had been with the Innocence Project for a year, doing legal research, and he enjoyed helping those wrongfully convicted. Sitting at his desk, he read the letter. It was addressed to the Innocence Project and began by saying, "I don't know where to begin, so I'll start at the beginning. My name is not important, but the information I have could change the lives of the 2 convicted and 5 others, including me." About 15 months ago, a man responded to her advertisement for a computer-literate person. He knew as much, if not more, about business networks than she did. She hired him immediately. This man, whom she will call Mark, was quiet but exceptionally skilled. Within 2 months, her business had grown by 50% due to his efforts and long hours. When Mark started working for her, he had just arrived in town and hadn't yet rented a place. My business was new, so I rented him our basement room for extra income. I wanted to reinvest profits into the business to support me and my young son, though this would be a risk. However, I had a strong conviction that Mark was not a threat. We quickly settled into a routine. For the first 3 months, he lived in the basement, but ate with us and commuted together. He often worked extra hours without pay, preferring productivity over. Over time, our relationship evolved from employer-employee to friendship and eventually to a loving family. My son now regards him as his father. However, I sensed something was amiss with Mark one quiet afternoon. I locked the office door and invited him in to talk. He eventually confessed that he was running from a failed marriage. His wife had betrayed him with a good friend, and he had nearly committed homicide. Over time, our professional relationship evolved into a close friendship, and eventually into a family unit. My son has always referred to him as Dad. One quiet afternoon, I sensed something was wrong when I locked the office door and called him in to talk. He eventually confessed that he had been running from a failed marriage. His wife had betrayed him with a good friend, and he had nearly committed homicide as a result. Our conversation helped him overcome his past. We started dating on weekends, maintaining separate roles during the week. After a month, he moved from the basement into my bedroom, and we became a family unit. Despite this, I felt he was still hiding something. Our relationship grew stronger, and Mark became a father figure to my son, who needs a loving dad. 4 days ago, Mark collapsed at work and was diagnosed with a heart condition requiring surgery. Once stabilized, he was moved to a private room where he was worried that if he did not survive the surgery, his story would die with him. Over the course of a day, he told me his story. Once I agreed to share it with you, he seemed relieved. Now, as he sleeps, I am typing this letter with our son asleep beside him. I need to finish this tonight, create a DVD and send everything to you by noon tomorrow, ensuring it can't be traced back to us. Mark's story began almost 2 years ago. He was happily married to Lisa for nearly 6 years when he noticed a small bruise on her right bosom. Initially thinking it was. After realizing that the bruise looked more like a love bite than a car accident, he spent the night pondering how it had occurred. These thoughts continued to preoccupy him the next day at work. By the time he arrived at his office, he felt foolish for his suspicions. He had no evidence of wrongdoing and thought it was all circumstantial. Just before lunch, the parts delivery manager brought him a tracking device to evaluate for improving the delivery service. Mark decided how to test it. Following the installation of the device in his wife's car, he checked the monitor while at work. She had said she was going shopping, but the tracker showed that she had in fact gone to Blake Moore's house an hour later. Her car was still there. Suspecting something was wrong, he called her when she said she was shopping. He knew something was amiss that evening. He listened to her false story about shopping, feeling sick, but deciding not to jump to conclusions, and observed her for another week while on a business trip, tracking her car through 3 states to Blake's house from 8:00 p.m. to 2:00 a.m. She provided false information regarding her whereabouts for the duration of the night. Upon returning, he discovered evidence of her infidelity, which caused him great distress. He considered taking action, but felt that Blake, being a frequent socialite, would not pursue Lisa with such determination. His heart was broken that night when he paid a visit to the elderly widow next door under the pretext of Mark was devastated when he discovered his wife's infidelity. He considered destroying her, but decided against it. He knew that Blake was a philanderer, but never suspected that he would pursue Lisa. That night, he visited the elderly widow next door, under the pretense of borrowing a wrench. He retrieved a hidden revolver from her late husband's toolbox. Mark intended to use it to eliminate Blake and Lisa, and then himself. He decided to wait until he caught them together. He ordered his own tracking device to return the one he was evaluating. Luckily, Lisa and Blake didn't meet for another week, giving Mark time to rethink. In those days, he devised a better plan to frame them for homicide. He spent a week planning and gathering supplies. When ready, he claimed a weekend business trip, knowing they'd meet while he was away. When his wife went to Blake's, he set his plan in motion, creating. Mark spent a week planning and gathering supplies. He claimed a weekend business trip, intending to meet with Lisa while he was away. He set his plan in motion by creating a paper trail suggesting he was divorcing her. Crucially, he almost forgot to send a crucial email to his lawyer that would implicate Lisa and Blake. Before leaving, he fired a bullet into his car's passenger seat and another into a wooden block, muffling the shots with a blanket in the garage. This step felt like a sense of relief washed over him as he realized that the start of his revenge was imminent. You should look for archived newspaper articles online. Mark followed the trial daily and said that most of the story was documented by court reporters. He thinks that a complete review of the court transcript will clarify everything. First, he drove his car to a park near Blake's house and found a secluded spot. He had a large gym bag with all the materials for his plan. He spread everything out on a picnic table, covering it with an old blanket. He unloaded the firewood, plastic sheeting and a spare tire, creating a drag trail to the paved road. Then he returned the tire to the trunk. He distributed the firewood using a small flashlight. He then sat quietly to see if anyone noticed. Mark drew blood from his hand using a needle, collecting nearly 2 pints, which he diluted with distilled water. He then sprayed the blood in patterns to mimic an arterial jet and smeared it. He smeared the blood on the car seat and the ground to suggest significant blood loss. He filled bullet holes in the firewood and car upholstery with more blood. After finishing, he packed everything in his gym bag and left the park. He reached an old car he had bought for the purpose. Dizzy from blood loss, he rested until nearly 6:00 a.m. He then drove to Blake's house to complete his plan. Lisa's car was still at Blake's house and unlocked, so he put a couple of drops of blood on the gas pedal. He also smeared blood on Blake's car, but got scared when he saw a light on in Blake's bedroom. He quickly left, went to a pay phone and used a voice changer to report his car in the park, pretending to be a woman. He then, at midnight, he drove to Blake's house to continue executing his plan. He found Lisa's car still at Blake's house and unlocked, so he placed a few drops of blood on the gas pedal. He also smeared blood on Blake's car, but he quickly left when he saw a light on in Blake's bedroom. He proceeded to a pay phone and used a voice changer to report his car in the park, pretending to be a woman. He then disposed of 2 shovels and the revolver in the river. Exhausted, he stayed in a motel for 2 days, taking supplements and eating energy bars. He made another call with the voice changer, this time as an old man, which helped the police find the revolver. Mark told me this entire story because he wishes to leave his past as Mark Evans behind. He now uses a different identity, which my Mark Evans disposed of 2 shovels and the revolver in the river. Exhausted, he stayed in a motel for 2 days, taking supplements and eating energy bars. He made another call with the voice changer, this time as an old man, which helped the police find the revolver. Mark told me this whole story because he wants to leave his past as Mark Evans behind. He now uses a different identity, which my son and I know him by, and wants to keep it. He asked me to send this information to help overturn the convictions of Lisa Evans and Blake Moore. Tomorrow, I'll pick up a copy of the New York Times and an inkwell. We'll use part of the front page to put all of Mark's fingerprints in a bloodstain, which will match the DNA from the park, proving he's alive. This should be enough. Son and I are working to overturn the convictions of Lisa Evans and Blake Moore. We have reason to believe that the DNA belongs to Mark. Tomorrow, I will pick up a copy of the New York Times and an inkwell. We will use part of the front page to put all of Mark's fingerprints in a bloodstain, which will match the DNA from the park, proving he's alive. This should be enough. At the end of the letter, there was a handwritten note: Mark came out of surgery in good condition. He wants me to fly to Seattle tomorrow to send this package. I hate to leave him, but it will ease his mind. We're expecting twins in about 3 months. Tony Kelly turned the last page to check for any additional notes, but it was blank. He put his feet down. At the end of the letter, there was a handwritten note that read, Mark came out of surgery in good condition. He wants me to fly to Seattle tomorrow to send this package. I hate to leave him, but it will ease his mind. We're expecting twins in about 3 months. Tony Kelly turned the last page to check for any additional notes, but it was blank. He put his feet down from the desk and examined the other items in the package. The DVD was labeled Photos Taken in George Washington Park, and the black plastic envelope was marked Fingerprints and DNA. He reviewed the printed pages again for any extra notes and then called a senior attorney. This was beyond his ability to handle alone. It didn't take long to confirm that the DNA belonged to Mark Evans. Fingerprints matched those from his car found in the park, proving he was still alive. With undeniable evidence that 2 people were convicted of a homicide that never happened, the state attorney general and governor expedited their release a week later. They returned to the courtroom with Basil Smith, Lisa's parents, and even District Attorney Jeff Bagden. State representatives were present when the state attorney general apologized for the wrongful conviction. He blamed Mark Evans for misleading the justice system and announced efforts to find him and hold him accountable for the financial costs incurred. When asked where they would start looking for Mark, he could only shake his head. Blake Moore seemed changed, no longer arrogant, but state representatives present. The state attorney general apologized for the wrongful conviction, blaming Mark Evans for misleading the justice system and announcing efforts to find him and hold him accountable for the financial costs incurred. When asked where they would start looking for Mark, he could only shake his head. Blake Moore seemed changed, no longer arrogant, but more inclined to compromise. He apologized to Lisa for the events leading to their imprisonment. Lisa appeared indifferent, longing only to leave with her parents. Both Basil Smith and the district attorney apologized, acknowledging they had been misled by Mark Evans. They vowed to be more diligent in future cases, although the state found no liability. Lisa and Blake received $50,000 each in compensation. Blake, whose business went bankrupt and house was sold for legal fees, left town. He commented to Lisa that Mark had severely wronged them and the check was a mere fraction of what he lost. Lisa, visibly warned by her ordeal, simply said they deserved it and left without saying goodbye. 2 weeks after their release, a large envelope arrived at Basil Smith's office. Inside was a note for the attorney and a sealed envelope for Lisa. Basil delivered the letter to Lisa at her apartment after a brief conversation. She was left with the envelope, which she opened with apprehension. Recognizing Mark's handwriting, she proceeded to read the letter. Lisa, I apologize for the time you spent in prison. Your betrayal of Blake was extremely challenging for me. My new life and happiness have shown me that freeing you both was. She left her with the envelope, which she opened with apprehension. Recognizing Mark's handwriting, she read the letter. Lisa, I apologize for the time you spent in jail. Your betrayal of Blake drove me nearly insane. My new life and happiness have shown me that freeing you both was necessary for my own freedom. I know authorities will search for me, but I am confident in my new life with my new family. Good luck and goodbye, Emma. The letter slipped from her hand, shattering any remaining hope of reconciliation with Mark.